Every story we tell is a journey, a thrilling adventure that will keep you hooked from start to finish. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing our community come together from all around the world. And don't forget, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Tomorrow, we have a special story just for you. Trust us, you won't want to miss it. See you on the next adventure. The loudest warning ever from a royal guard, tourists left stunned. Buckingham Palace, one of the most iconic tourist destinations in the world. Every day, thousands of visitors gather at its gates, eager to witness the legendary royal guards, known for their unshakable discipline and unwavering posture. Among today's crowd was Jake, a tourist from the United States, visiting London with his friends. Jake had always been the adventurous type. He loved pushing boundaries, testing limits, and finding ways to make his trips memorable. When he heard that the royal guards never react, he was intrigued. So, they just stand there? No matter what? Jake asked his friends as they walked toward the palace. One of them chuckled. Yeah, unless you touch them or break the rules. But nobody's dumb enough to do that. Jake smirked. That sounds like a challenge. He turned toward the nearest guard, a tall soldier standing firm in his traditional red uniform and tall black bearskin hat. His rifle was held at his side, his expression unreadable. Jake stepped closer. The guard didn't move. Jake grinned, turning back toward his friends, who were now watching with curiosity. "Take a picture of me," he said, handing his phone to one of them. The crowd around him began to take notice. A few whispered among themselves. "He's too close. Does he even know the rules?" Jake ignored them. He lifted his arm, pretending to place it over the guard's shoulder as if they were buddies. It was just a joke, he thought. But what he didn't realize was that he had just made a huge mistake. At that very moment, the atmosphere shifted. A few people in the crowd gasped, sensing that something was about to happen. Jake was seconds away from learning a very important lesson. Because breaking the rules in front of a royal guard always comes with consequences. Jake grinned as he posed next to the royal guard, standing just a few inches away. His friend held up the phone, ready to snap a picture. "Come on, make it look good," Jake joked. "I want people to think we're best buddies." He turned toward the soldier, expecting to see the same blank, emotionless expression. And that's exactly what he saw. The royal guard remained frozen, his gaze locked straight ahead, not acknowledging Jake's presence at all. The soldier's posture was perfect, his hand steady on his rifle, his stance unshaken. Jake smirked. "All right, let's make this even funnier," he said. That's when he made his biggest mistake. In a split second, he reached out his hand, pretending to tap the guard on the shoulder. The crowd gasped. A woman nearby covered her mouth. A man shook his head, whispering, "Oh no, he shouldn't have done that." Jake's hand had barely gotten halfway to the soldier's uniform when... boom! A sudden, powerful voice shattered the air. "Stand back from the guard." The shout was so loud and authoritative that it sent a shockwave through the crowd. Jake jumped back instinctively, his heart pounding in his chest. For the first time, the royal guard moved. It wasn't much, just a small shift in his stance, but it was enough to make everyone freeze. Jake stood there, eyes wide, completely caught off guard. He had expected the soldier to do nothing, to stay frozen like a statue, just as the rumors said. But this was something completely different. The people around him murmured in hushed voices, the tension in the air thick. One thing was clear, Jake had crossed the line. And now, he was about to face the consequences. Jake stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. The command from the royal guard had been so loud, so authoritative, that it felt like it had shaken the very ground beneath his feet. "Stand back from the guard." The words still echoed in his ears. For the first time since arriving at Buckingham Palace, he wasn't laughing anymore. The entire crowd had gone silent. A group of tourists who had been taking photos lowered their cameras, their eyes locked on Jake. A woman nearby murmured to her husband, "I've never seen a guard react like that before." Another man shook his head, whispering, "That guy's in trouble now." Jake swallowed hard. His body was still tense, his muscles locked in place, as if he were waiting for something else to happen. The royal guard, though now back in his rigid stance, seemed larger than before, as if his presence had somehow grown in power after his thunderous command. His rifle was still at his side, his face still unreadable. But now, Jake knew better than to underestimate him. He had thought these soldiers were just for show, that they were nothing more than tourist attractions in fancy uniforms. But now he realized the truth. These weren't just men standing still for the sake of tradition. They were real soldiers. Trained. Disciplined. And absolutely not to be messed with. Jake finally exhaled, taking a small step backward, as if trying to undo what had just happened. A security officer near the gates began to approach, his expression serious. Jake could feel every eye in the crowd on him, waiting to see what would happen next. His hands felt clammy, his mind racing with how badly he had just embarrassed himself. But it wasn't just embarrassment. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt genuine respect. The royal guard hadn't needed to move much. He hadn't needed to be aggressive. But with just a single command, he had made it very clear. This was not a game. And Jake had just learned that lesson the hard way. Jake slowly stepped back, his breath still shaky. The weight of what had just happened was finally sinking in. He had come to Buckingham Palace thinking this was just another tourist spot, a place to take fun pictures, play around, and maybe even get a laugh out of the royal guards. But now, he knew better. The soldier in front of him wasn't just a man in a fancy uniform. He was a disciplined, trained protector, a guardian of the palace, standing watch over one of the most historically significant landmarks in the world. And Jake had just crossed the line. The security officer who had started approaching earlier now stood beside him, his arms crossed. "Sir, you need to maintain a respectful distance from the guards." Jake nodded quickly. Yeah, I get it. I didn't mean any harm." The officer steadied him for a moment before speaking again. "They're not here for entertainment. They're real soldiers, and their job is to stand guard, not to be touched or bothered." Jake felt his face heat up. He could still feel the eyes of the crowd on him, watching, judging. A few people had started whispering to each other. "At least he's backing off now. I bet he won't try that again." Jake glanced at the royal guard once more, half expecting him to have some kind of reaction. But of course, he didn't. The soldier had already gone back to his unwavering, motionless stance, as if nothing had ever happened. That somehow made it even more powerful. Jake suddenly felt an odd sense of admiration. This soldier had just put him in his place, not by yelling at him repeatedly, not by pushing him, not by engaging in some kind of argument. He had simply commanded respect, and Jake had no choice but to listen. Jake sighed and finally took a full step back. His friends, who had been watching from a distance, walked up beside him. One of them smirked. "Well, that didn't go how you planned, huh?" Jake let out a nervous laugh. No, it didn't." And for the first time since arriving at the palace, he realized that wasn't a bad thing. Because today, he had learned a lesson he would never forget. Jake took a deep breath, his hands still slightly shaking from the experience. The royal guard hadn't moved a muscle since issuing the command, but Jake felt his presence more than ever. This wasn't just a job to them. It was a duty. A responsibility. And he had disrespected it without even realizing. He turned to the security officer, still standing beside him. "I get it now. I really do. I shouldn't have done that." The officer nodded, seeing the sincerity in Jake's voice. "As long as you've learned from it. That's what matters." Jake looked around at the crowd. Some had moved on, returning to their own sightseeing. But a few were still watching, as if waiting to see what he would do next. His friends, standing next to him, exchanged glances. One of them finally spoke up. "So, what now?" Jake let out a small breath. Then, without hesitation, he turned back toward the royal guard. This time, he didn't try to push the limits. He didn't try to test the soldiers' patience. Instead, he stood up straight, kept a respectful distance, and gave a small nod. A silent acknowledgement. A quiet way of saying "I understand now." The royal guard, of course, remained still. But that didn't matter. Because at that moment, Jake wasn't looking for a reaction anymore. He turned back to his friends, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right. Maybe let's just take a normal picture instead." His friends chuckled, and his best friend quickly lifted the phone. Click. The picture was nothing special. Just a tourist standing in front of a motionless royal guard. But to Jake, it meant so much more. Because this time, he knew the truth. This wasn't just a soldier standing still for show. This was a man serving his country. A man trained to protect, to uphold centuries-old traditions, and to demand respect without saying a word. As Jake walked away from Buckingham Palace, he looked over his shoulder one last time. The royal guard remained there, standing firm, watching over history itself. Jake smiled to himself. He came to get a reaction from the royal guard. But instead, the royal guard had changed him. This was one of the most intense moments ever captured at Buckingham Palace. Do you think the royal guard reacted appropriately? Or was the tourist just having fun? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this moment, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories like this.